story time.
Holidays and Heroes. Let's celebrate Thanksgiving Day by Barbara DeRubertis, illustrated by Thomas Sperling. The Wampanoag and the Pilgrims. Massasoit was chief of the Wampanoag. Each Wampanoag village had a leader called a sachem, but Massasoit was chief sachem of all the villages. He was a wise and powerful leader. Massasoit must have been worried when he heard that about 100 English settlers had come to his land. It was November of 1620 when these settlers first arrived on a ship called the Mayflower. The ship dropped anchor off the coast of land that is now part of the state of Massachusetts. Some of the people on board the ship were called Pilgrims. They had come to this land to find freedom. Others who traveled with them were also hoping to find a better life. For weeks, the Pilgrims searched for a good place to settle. One time, arrows were shot at them. They fired back with their muskets. No one was hurt, but everyone was worried. The Wampanoag were worried about these English settlers. The English were worried about the people they called Indians. Finally, the Pilgrims found a good harbor at the place named Plymouth on their map. After November came December. The season of winter began. Winter at Plymouth was black and white. It was dark and damp and cold. The gray of hunger and sickness arrived, and tales of sadness were told. At Plymouth, the Pilgrims found land that had already been cleared. They did not know that the land had once been a Wampanoag village called Patuxet. The settlers continued to live on the Mayflower while they built a common house. It would be used as a storehouse and as a church. After December came January and February. The Indians must have wondered how the settlers could possibly survive the winter. They had arrived too late to plant crops. They did not have time to build warm houses. In the coldest days of winter, the settlers almost ran out of food. Most of them suffered from terrible sickness. Only 6 or 7 people remained healthy. They were kept busy taking care of all the others. The common house was used as a hospital. Before the sickness was over, almost half of the settlers died. Later, a pilgrim named William Bradford wrote about this time. He said that those who took care of the sick showed true love for their friends. If the Wampanoag watched the settlers, they watched silently from a distance. Chief Massasoit knew how terrible sickness could be. Sometimes entire Wampanoag villages had been wiped out because of sickness. Would any of these new settlers survive? After February came March. The season of spring began. Spring was painted a soft new green for the colorful flowers Earth sends. The season of hope arrived at last. It came in the shape of friends. In March, the first Indian visitor walked into Plymouth. His name was Samoset. Samoset surprised the settlers by greeting them in English. On his 3rd visit, Samoset brought a Wampanoag friend named Squanto, who spoke even better English. Many years before, Squanto had been captured and taken to England. There he had learned to speak English. When he finally returned home to Patuxet, he learned that all the people of his village had died from a terrible sickness. Squanto now told the settlers that Chief Massasoit himself was coming to visit them. Massasoit, the chief of sachem of the Wampanoag, came with 60 people. He had decided to make peace. These settlers were weak, but they had powerful weapons. The settlers could help his people, and he could help the settlers. Massasoit looked splendid. The mulberry red paint on his face showed he was an important leader. He wore a turkey feather in his hair. Around his neck hung beads of white bone. His coat, leggings, and moccasins were made of animal skins. With a ceremony fit for a king, the settlers welcomed Massasoit. He was presented with gifts of knives, jewelry, and food. Then he was led to an unfinished house. Quickly, a rug and cushions were laid on the floor. Drums rolled, trumpets sounded, 6 men saluted with their muskets. The Pilgrim leader, Governor John Carver, entered. He bowed to kiss Massasoit's hand. Massasoit then did the same. Chief Massasoit and Governor Carver made a peace treaty that lasted more than 50 years. Sadly, some later European settlers were not as respectful of the Indians they met. A Pilgrim later wrote that Massasoit was truly a great chief. He ruled by reason, not force. He always told the truth, and his word could be trusted. After March came April and May. Squanto decided to stay with the settlers at Plymouth. He taught them many things. He said that the time to plant seed was when the oak leaves grew to the size of a mouse's ear. He showed the settlers how to plant Indian corn. Fish, he said, should be planted with the seed. The fish would help the corn grow tall and strong. Beans could also be planted in the same hole. Their vines would climb up the corn stalks, and pumpkins could grow on the ground below. The Wampanoag called corn, beans, and squash the 3 sisters. During that spring of peace and hope, a sad event also happened. Governor Carver died. The settlers chose William Bradford as their new governor. The people of Plymouth must have thought he was a good governor. They elected him 30 more times. After May came June, July, and August. The season of summer had arrived. Summer brought Plymouth skies of blue, lit by a yellow sun. The children picked bright red berries and plums when the long day's work was done. Squanto also taught the settlers other things: to catch fish, to hunt deer with bow and arrow, to dig clams and eels out of the mud, to tap maple trees for sap to make syrup and sugar, to know which plants were food, which were poison, and which were medicine. The settlers worked in their fields. They finished 7 houses built with pine boards and thatched roofs. They made beds, benches, stools, and tables. They dipped candles and made soap. The children worked just as hard as their parents. But on Sundays, the Pilgrim neither worked nor played. They went to church. After August came September and October. It was now the season of autumn. Autumn was russet and golden and brown, like the ripening fields of corn. The Indians and settlers were helping each other, and a shared Thanksgiving was born. Finally, the last of the harvest was brought in. The seed brought from England had done poorly, but the Indian corn harvest was excellent. The settlers would have plenty of food for the coming winter. Governor Bradford decided it was a good time for a celebration. They would have a Thanksgiving festival at Plymouth. Chief Massasoit, of course, would be invited. The settlers were very grateful to him and all the Wampanoag people. Chief Massasoit certainly would have understood why the settlers wanted to have a Thanksgiving festival. The Wampanoag also had festivals to give thanks for a good harvest. During their harvest festivals, the Wampanoag feasted, danced, held contests, and played games. They also gave part of what they had to the poor, and they gave something back to the earth. They believed that people cannot just take without giving. Preparation for the Thanksgiving feast took many days. The men went hunting for geese, ducks, and turkeys. These would be roasted over open fires. The 4 married women who had survived the winter did all the cooking. It was a big job. Of course, the children helped. Berries and nuts were gathered, and corn was used to make bread. Fish and shellfish were smoked, dried, or simmered in thick, steaming soup. Pumpkin was probably cooked over hot coals or stewed, but not baked in pies. Chief Massasoit arrived for Thanksgiving at Plymouth with 90 of his people. Fortunately, they also brought 5 deer as a gift. There were nearly 150 people to feed. Everyone enjoyed feasting on the delicious food. Then they put on shows for each other. The settlers marched and fired their weapons. The Indians showed their skill with bows and arrows. They also held contests and played games. The Indians and Pilgrims were surprised to discover that many of their games were similar. Everyone was having such a good time that the festival lasted for 3 days. Today, almost 400 years later, we remember that festival when we celebrate Thanksgiving Day. A year with 12 months and 4 seasons had passed for the settlers at Plymouth. The Indians and Pilgrims were different, it's true. They also were much the same. With talking and sharing, with helping and caring, first peace, then friendship came. Chief Massasoit probably wondered what the future would hold. But for now, the Wampanoag and the Pilgrims had made peace, and they were friends.
The end. Join our channel and subscribe.